much. Okay, so this is Kumu. You need a Kumu account to do social system mapping. Kumu is the network graph visualization platform that we use to visualize or present our data. This isn't the tool that will gather the data in, but it's what we use to present it in various ways that make it easier to read than if it were just in a bunch of spreadsheets. There are other network graph visualization platforms that you could use to present the data that you gather from sumApp, but we use Kumu because it has the most flexibility built into it in terms of enabling you to create an interface that everyday network members can navigate and interact with and get meaning from. So some of the other options are really great, but they're generally aimed at a more technical viewer audience, and they don't enable you to tailor things as much as we need to do for our network clients. So what we're going to look at now is specific to the Kumu functionality. So as they point out here on their landing page, people use Kumu to make all kinds of maps: stakeholder maps, system maps, social network maps, community asset maps. And so when people ask what a social system map is, at the highest level, the simplest answer is that it's really a mashup of all of these kinds of maps. So the foundation and the core of a social system map is the humans in the system, who they are and how they're connected. So it starts with a social network map, but then it takes all of these additional dimensions of a social system that are relevant and meaningful to know within any given specific context. For instance,
yeah. Where's my bag?
Hang on, I'm gonna mute that person. Okay, for instance, stakeholder interests in a stakeholder map, the systemic forces in a system map, or the assets that the people can contribute, as in an asset map. And it layers all of these additional dimensions on top of the social network map so that we can look more deeply at how everything is interconnected. At first, most people can find these maps pretty overwhelming and chaotic, but we as map makers are learning to present this complex data in ways that can help people to see the patterns within the community. And we as map users and map teachers are learning to create experiences around these maps that can help network members to make sense out of the apparent chaos. So I'm going to go to a map. Ultimately, the goal of a social system map is to generate a highly customized tool that enables a change network to think differently as well as act differently. It helps members to think differently about the network itself because it helps them understand the network as a complex adaptive system, and it represents how multidimensional any complex system is. And in that way, it also helps them to think more broadly about all of the systems that they're part of or impacted by or trying to impact, so that the tool becomes one way for learning to think more systemically. And it helps them to act differently because as they apply the new insights that they can get from this kind of multidimensional map, they're now able to make better informed and more conscious and strategic decisions about the actions that they take. So I'm going to start by showing you what most of these maps have in common. Then as we do a walkthrough of sumApp, we'll start to talk about the differences that they can encompass, and we'll look in a little more detail at how the sumApp setup correlates to what you're seeing in Kumu. So this is the Human Systems Dynamics Practitioner Network Map. This is a public map. Most of our client maps aren't public, so there are a lot of things that I can't show you. But with this one, I will be able to share a link to it in the follow-up email that I'll send out after this session, so you'll be able to dig into it more later yourselves. So what we're looking at right now is the two main parts of a Kumu map. On the right is what we call the map canvas, which is full of dots and lines, and then around the edges there's some random seeming words, and then there's usually a legend to help you understand what you're looking at. And then on the left, we have what I call the side panel, or what Kumu calls the profile. Right now, the side panel is full of content that explains what the map is and what can be done with it. So all of this stuff here is editable by the map maker, so it can say whatever you want it to. You can even put pictures or videos into this space. It opens and closes. If you can click on the little ellipses here to open it if you need more space for your map, and the tab key will also do that really quickly. So on the canvas, the dots could represent anything, but in a social system map, they almost always represent people or sometimes organizations. So if we zoom in a bit, we can see that these dots are stand-ins for people because we can see their faces and we can see their names. So as I said, right now, the side panel is, hang on. The side panel has information about the whole map overall, but the side panel can also, the content of the side panel also changes. So if I click on a person, so for instance, now I'm clicking on Glenda Ouyang, who's the founder of the Human Systems Dynamic Institute, you'll start to see more, you can see a whole bunch more information about that person. So again, we have her picture and her name, and we have all of this data that she has given us about herself. This data comes out of sumApp, so whatever you want to show up in this side panel about the individual, you'll set that up in your sumApp survey. In addition to the dots, we can also see that there's a bunch of lines. These lines represent the relationships between individuals. So it's you to me, me to somebody else. And these, so in sumApp, there's a section asking people in the network to tell us who else they know and how well they know them. And then their responses in sumApp generate these lines in Kumu. So the lines also have a side panel. So if we click on a line, now we can see that Simon Wallace is the person who's reporting about this relationship. The relationship is to Glenda Ouyang, and Simon is saying that he's collaborated with Glenda in the last year. Right now, in this instance, there's only one question about relationships, but there could be as many as you like. You can set up as many as you like in sumApp. Okay. Other things to notice, I think you might have seen this already, if you hover over a person, Kumu will highlight their first-degree connections, the people that they know directly, that they've reported on knowing directly. So we can begin to see each individual's personal network as it fits within the overall network. Some people will ask about the sizes. You might have noticed that some of the dots are bigger than the other dots. And that is a function of how many direct relationships they've reported that they have within the map. So we don't have to size, this is a piece of the Kumu flexibility. We don't have to size them. We could just leave them all be the same, and that's a choice that we make. And we could use different metrics for sizing them. But for us, that first-degree connection, number of first-degree connection seems to work the best. The other thing people will ask about is the location on the map. It might seem like the best connected people are always in the middle, and the middle people are always the ones with the most connections. But if we look, we can see that, for instance, this person is still pretty close to the middle, but she's not nearly as big as a dot as these other ones are. And that's because what locates people on the map is how dense connections they have to one another. So you can see, like over here, there's this cluster here, which people are kind of close together, and you can see by the lines that most of them know each other, so they're being pulled together. So this smaller person in the middle doesn't know as many people, but the people she knows are closer to the middle. So that's causing her location. Now the point here is that while size and location are generally correlated, they're still each a different dynamic, and we can decorate and read them independently to help us make sense of what's going on. Sometimes that's relevant and sometimes it's not, but that's just an example of how things work in Kumu. So in sumApp, we gather like I said, we gather all these various layers of data and information. And so with this richness of information, we're going to need to look at the data from different angles. We might be examining it in one instance based on the structure of the network. We might be looking at it in another instance based on the relationship to forces in the system. So in a social system map, you'll often see that there's not only a lot of text here, but there's some links here on the side panel, and these links are taking you to other views of the map. We call it one map. If there's one underlying data set that has all the different data that we're looking at. So that's one map, but we have different views for how we visualize and slice and dice and think about that data. So in this map, we have this main view, which is where we're at, and then we have another view, clustering on models and methods, and I'm not going to click on that here because it might take a little while to load, so I already have it open. And so now as you can see, it's the same map, it's the same bunch of people, but now we're doing something different. So you probably notice here that the dots can also be circles, or they can be circles, but they can also be rectangles or squares. And so we use color and shape to generate a language that remains consistent throughout the map. So in our maps, circles always represent the primary element type that we're dealing with, which is usually persons, and sometimes also includes organizations. Then we use squares or rectangles to represent more abstract things, such as skills or assets, systemic forces, and so on. So for us, circles are nodes with agency. They're the actors in the system, and they are who we gather our data directly from using sumApp. And non-circles represent the things that flow through the system, or the dynamics of the system, as defined and reported on by the people in the system. So then if it's a network, then it's the people in the network itself who, as they learn how to use these maps and how to sense make with them, define what dimensions are important to ask about and to visualize. So over time, the content or the kinds of rectangles that we see can get more and more specific and more sophisticated. In this particular instance, the rectangles represent HSD models and methods. So these were listed in a question in sumApp asking which models and methods people use frequently and which they'd like to learn more about from someone. And then the lines represent the connections that each person said that they had to that model or method. Okay, I'm going to move on to another map. This one is private, so I'm not going to be able to share it with you later, but I do have permission to share it with you so long as I don't zoom in on network members other than the foundation staff here. So, but the main thing that I want to show you in this map is a thing that we call time tagging. So this map was made for a foundation that sends cohorts of a few dozen people from our region to various large national conferences. They all go together, and then the foundation will host some special events during the conference just for this cohort of their own attendees to do some network weaving and network training. So in 2017, they did 5 events, and what they wanted to understand was how well this idea of curated conference attendance worked in terms of increasing connectivity across our region. And then they also wanted to know how well the different activities that they tried at the different events worked relative to one another in terms of connectivity. So here we surveyed everyone who was going to the events before the event and then again after the event. So here you can see that the connectivity before the event, can't zoom too far in, but you can see that there weren't a whole lot of relationships. The other thing to note is that these big nodes in the middle of these clusters are actually foundation staff. So if we took the staff out, we'd see that there really weren't a lot of relationships pre-existing from any of these people before they went to these events. And then we pulled them again after the event, and you can see that the people who attended this particular event right here reported having had far more interactions than did the people who attended this event, or even this event. So we can see that this one was much more successful in terms of connectivity than the other ones. And so now they can go back and look at what they did differently in that instance so that they can learn from that and continue to improve. Now, these time tags are defined in sumApp, and they could be any kind of time frame that you want them to be. They could be, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, or they could be Q1, Q2, or as we have here, before and after. So you set them up in sumApp, and then once you've got them you've had some time, so you've got data for each of those time frames, you can just kind of march through the time frames and look at the changes in your network over time in terms of how many members you had, as well as how well connected they are, as well as if you're actually intentionally trying to shift some of the patterns of connectivity in the network, you can see how that's changing over time, which can teach you a lot about what's working and what's not working. Okay. Here's another public map, which I will send you a link to in my follow-up email. And the main thing that I want you to get from this map is that sometimes there's so much data in a map that we have to make compromises. You'll notice that here we're not using circles or photos. Well, actually, you can't even see any. Yeah, we're not using circles or photos, and that's because if we did, the map won't even load. It would take so long for the browser to process the data that it would just time out over and over again. So this map has just under 1,200 people in it, and it has just under 10,000 connections that are being drawn on the map. So for me, this represents just about the maximum size data set that Kumu can handle. And when we get to that volume, like I said, we have to make compromises. We can't do things like time tagging because time tagging increases the data volume exponentially. And we have to use lower quality, faster rendering settings so that, like we have here, to even get the data on the map. So you'll get to look at this one some more because I'll share the link with you, but just be really patient with how slowly it responds to everything. And I'm going to close it because it bogs my computer down. So this is the REAMP Network's social system map. And I think this is one of my favorite maps because of how rich and robust it is. And because they're doing some really deep sense making with this map, which is really exciting to see. Now, this is a private map, so you won't get a chance to return to it and dig into it. But I do have explicit permission to share it with you, so long as I don't zoom in and show you things about the individual members. So we're not going to dig a whole lot into this one, but I want to point out a couple things. One is that because of the additional complexity and sophistication in sense making that they're doing with this map, we have a lot more links. So we have a lot more different ways that we're slicing and dicing and presenting and viewing the data. So the side panel has more links. And these different views are around the different kinds of things that you're trying to understand and examine with this map. So another thing, as I mentioned previously, there's these words around the edges, and these of most social system maps, these are actually controls. So they're all custom made from the data that's gathered in sumApp. So whatever questions you ask in sumApp, you can use as these controls. They might be acting as filters. So in this instance, they're filtering out. So let's say I'm in Minnesota. So I'm going to filter out everybody who's not in Minnesota. And this map or this network is focused on equitable deep decarbonization, and they've got 4 main focuses for that. And let's say that I'm in Minnesota working on decarbonizing the power sector with clean, affordable resources. So I'm going to get rid of everybody who's not working on that in Minnesota. So it's filtering down further and further. And then I'm actually working in rural Minnesota. So I just want to talk to people who are in rural Minnesota. So I can filter down, and now I can find 6 people that I probably should reach out to and connect with because we're working on the same thing in the same area, geographically relatively close. So these could well be my next collaboration partners. So the other thing we can do with this, another way of filtering, let me get everybody back on the map first. Okay. Another way we can filter is we had those connection questions where we're usually asking some version of how well do you know this person, a little, a middle, a little, you know, not at all, a tiny bit, a medium amount, a lot. And then we can also filter, we can filter on those questions. So we can say, now we can look at who in the network are intentionally collaborating with each other. So now we can see we can look at just the strong relationships, or we might be wanting to look at the weaker ties to see if there are relationships that we could be building on based on other things they have in common. So this is another view of that same map. So again, the same side panel, same overall data set. Sometimes these controls, so sometimes we can use the controls to dig in, to slice and dice, to analyze the data, and sometimes we can use the controls to step back and get an overview of the patterns in the network. And what do I mean by that? So for instance, this is the same, 2 of the same custom or controls that we had in the other view. But in this view, what we want to do is we're going to look at the structure of the network as a whole in relation to these dimensions. So I just clicked on Wisconsin, and you see that everybody stays on the map. We're not getting rid of the people who aren't in Wisconsin, but what we're doing is we're backgrounding them so we can actually see how the Wisconsin members fit into the overall network. And we can see that there's a lot of people from Wisconsin, relatively a lot of people from Wisconsin, and they're relatively well connected. Now, if we look at Michigan, we can see, oh, there's not so many people from Michigan, number one. Number two, they're not very well connected at all. There's not much density, and they don't have a lot of working relationships. So that might be something that we want to think about if it's important. It might not be important, but if it is there things that we want to think about doing to shift that dynamic. Here's another example. So doesn't have to be location. In this instance, it could be, what are you working on? So we have, and this feature here is called showcasing. So we set up a showcasing for the 4 main equitable deep decarbonization strategies. So in this one, we can see who in the network are working on decarbonizing power. And we see that, wow, they're spread out throughout the network. There's quite a few of them, and they're really quite well connected to one another. I'm clicking that, trying to unclick it. This map also has a lot of data, so it's not like the other one. It's not so slow, but it does move a little slowly. But then if I click on who in the network is working on changing transportation options, I can see that, wow, there's not so many people, and they again are not so well connected. And this is important in this particular network because they've done a systemic analysis and concluded that changing transportation options, not just making more clean transportation, but also changing the options that people have to choose from, is one of the biggest leverage points in the climate change puzzle. So for them, knowing now where the energy in the network is going is very important. Okay, moving on. This is the Rapid City Collective Impact map. This is like the first map that we made with sumApp. And this one is focusing on organizations as opposed to individuals. Again, we have filters based on the questions that we asked in sumApp. And the main thing I want to show you in this one, this is another view of the same map, is this one has something that shows up in a lot of our maps, which is called offers and asks. So again, the circles in this map are the organizations. They're the circles are the actors in the system, and then the rectangles are the things that can flow through the system or are the system, represent system dynamics in some way or another. So we often generate a list of assets that some members have a lot of, and others might need or need help with. So those might be skills, they might be kinds of expertise or material resources such as meeting space or vehicles or money or what have you. So we look for whatever is an important asset within the network that could support the network's work. And then in sumApp, we ask respondents which of those assets they have a lot of and which they could use more of. So in this instance, it's organizational strengths. So the rectangles here represent things that the organizations either said they had a lot of or that they could use help with. So then if we focus on, in this case, cultivating donors, we can see that there are dashed lines and there are solid lines. So the solid lines tell us that those organizations, in this instance, I'm hoping you can see that, cultivating donors, for instance, Catholic Prosperity Initiative says that they're great at cultivating donors. So they don't need a lot of help with that. Neither does this other network or another organization. But the ones that have dotted lines do need help with cultivating donors. So this is a place where we can begin to see what assets the network has, as well as to get a sense of where those assets are needed and find ways to help move those assets around in ways that are helpful. So as you can see, The maps I just showed you have a lot in common visually. There's circles and lines and squares, custom controls around the edges, and legends. Because of the common language that we try to use, the differences between these maps are less obvious. It's kind of like a book. Just by looking at the cover and flipping through the pages, you can't tell all that much about them, especially if it's in an unfamiliar language. So no matter what these maps say and how well they're made, in themselves, they're not going to accomplish much. People need to know how to read what the maps can tell them before they'll use them. So a few of our maps are really making a difference in their networks because the network itself is mature enough and as a whole thinks systemically enough that many members know how to sense make with them and they consult them regularly. But the problem with an online tool is that people expect the tools to do all the work itself. But the real potential in these maps is in changing mental models. And yet, even if it's sitting right in front of them, people can't see things that don't fit their existing models. So just having it available really isn't enough. Now, some people do just get it spontaneously because it already fits into their mental models. And they dig in and they use the maps on their own. But most people don't. So there has to be some commitment to help people learn. Because without some training and intentionality and frequent exposure to these maps, they'll just sit there serving no purpose. So in general, I'd say that we've just barely begun to scratch the surface in terms of discovering the best methods of helping people learn to get everything that they can out of a map like this, how to engage with the map at every opportunity, and what practices enhance sense making, and so on. So we know how to make the tool now, and we know it has value because there are places where people are ready for the tool and they get a lot out of it. Now what we need to do is learn how to help spread that value and potential. And that's what these mapping community of practice sessions are for, because there's a whole lot of research to be done, and there's a really big need for everyone who's doing this work to bring it back to one another and share what they're learning so that we can all learn it faster and help the networks that we're involved with move forward more effectively. Okay, so moving on to sumApp. So as I said, Kumu visualizes our data, but first we have to set up sumApp to gather the data from the network members themselves. So you'll get a link to the sign up page in my follow-up email as well. But before we dig into the back end of sumApp, I want to show you what it is that we're aiming for. So this is the member interface, or the front end of sumApp. This is what we're building when we're working in the back end of sumApp. So each member of your network has their own sumApp page. They each get access to it through their own link that they receive from an email from sumApp. And, okay. Sometimes people ask if everyone in the network needs to have and pay for a sumApp account on their own in order to be on the map. And the answer to that is no. You just need a single sumApp account or a single sumApp project for every social system map that you create. And a project is held in a single paying account. And each project can include up to 1,500 members. So this is Glenda's, what we call bio page. This is from the first map I showed you, the Human Systems Dynamics Network. Glenda, again, is the founder of that. This is her bio page. And on the bio page, we've got where we can share a little text that tells them what we're doing, what we want from them and why, text about what we're going to do with the data, a place for them to load a picture, and a place to input a very small tweet-sized bio that will help others to recognize them. Then there's a profile or the survey, which, okay, so this, again, this is the information that shows up in the side panel in Kumu. So everything that's here can show up there. And again, this is where we get the dimensions that we use to make the controls, the various filters, clusters, showcasing. So just to point that out, this is the question about the models and methods that we were clustering on in Glenda's map. This is the connections tab. And this is the heart and soul of sumApp, where we enable people to tell us about their relationships from one to the other person. So these are about not Glenda and not Bill, but the relationship between them. And again, the answers to these questions are what generates those lines in Kumu. So we, set up, so in sumApp you set up your connection questions. These are editable by you. Each person, so the member comes to what we call the member tile page. They look for who do I know in this list, and then they just pop it open and say how well they know them. And this person, she doesn't know yet or hasn't admitted to it. And then they just can go on and do that. I'm not going to click on the map tab because that will take a little while to load. But then the fourth tab is the map tab, and this is essentially, this is exactly the same map that you saw in Kumu. It's just in a slightly different context. So now we can tell that we're in sumApp because we've got this blue bar up above. But other than the context, it's the same map. And the great thing about having the map tab right here is that then people don't have to log into and out of different tools. It's just right there for them. And it helps people to understand right away what their data will be used for and why you're gathering it. Okay, so now that we've seen some maps and we've seen the front end of sumApp, I'm going to sort of quickly whip through the basics of the back end. So when you first log in, you'll see sumApp will take you to your projects list. If you have a lot of projects going on in your account, it will look like this with a row for each project. Each one of these rows represents a completely different social system map in Kumu. But you'll only see this if you already have a lot of projects. If this is your first time logging in, it will look more like this. You won't be able to see anything and you'll be kind of confused. So the first thing we do is, and I'm going to actually do this over here, is we need to create a project, and I'm just going to type and think at the same time. So we create a project, and then the project list will look like this. So now you'll have something. I'm going to turn the status on. And then, so when you're in your project list, you can see these buttons for each project, and you can click them down and to access all the different functionalities that you're going to need working in sumApp. You'll notice that this is broken down into 3 different general phases. It's really not linear, it's more circular, but there are different, they kind of go together, so we just separate them out to help you find the different areas. And then if you click on any one of them, you'll see that the same phases are represented across the top like this. So you get the same options as you got on the drop down. This is probably a good place to point out that we do have a knowledge base that which it's a work in progress, but it tells you, it has a lot of information, and it's broken down in pretty much the phases of mapping. So there's the envisioning phase, there's the mapping phase, and then there's the sense making phase. Like I said, there's a lot to be added to this, but it does have pretty much everything you know to get started in sumApp. So you can access it here on the website, and I'll send you a link to that. But you can also access it here by clicking on this orange question mark, and everything that's on the website is available right here as well, exact same stuff. So you can get it in either place. So when you first start working in sumApp, most people, where they start is in editing their survey form. So when you first set it up, there's a generic survey form here that we just give you to help you get started and understand how it works. So on the left side is the survey builder. We've got, as I said, generic questions. Maybe you don't want them, you can drag them off the builder. Maybe you want some different questions, you can drag them. So this over here on the right side are your question fields. It's basic, just a basic simple survey form builder that you're probably used to from other contexts. If you click on a question, you can edit them there and then save the whole thing. I'm going to show you just for familiarity reference. Hang on, where was I? So this is, again, the Human Systems Dynamics Network Map. And so this, again, this is precisely where that survey data or profile data came from in Glenda's profile page, and then what shows up on her side panel in Kumu. This, again, this can get a little confusing for people, so I hammer on it a little bit, but this, again, is about the person. This is me, this is about me, and it's about my relationship to abstract things, such as my relationship to gender, my relationship to race, my relationship to a sector, or to methods and models, or to different skill sets. It's not about my relationship to the other actors in the system, the human beings in the system. That comes from the connection options. So I'm going to first look at this differently. So the connection options so there's survey for persons, and then there's connection options for personal relationships. This is where we set this up. I can say I know this person a little. Medium, a lot. And you can see a preview down here that shows you what that's going to look like in the member tiles. This is a single question, obviously a single ranking question, and the respondents can pick only one choice. A lot of our clients only use one question, but you might want more questions, to have more questions in your member tiles. In that case, you'll need, so tier 1 and tier 2 are single question tiers. If you want more than one question, you have to get a tier 3 or a tier 4 account, which are what we call multimodal questions. I'm going to show you a situation where we have multimodal questions, which is, okay. In this particular map, the thing to notice about multimodal questions is that also the interface looks pretty much like the survey interface. It looks a little different than that one I was just showing you. That one was simpler. This one has more stuff on it, because you can have any kind of fields that you want. You can drag them over onto the survey builder. And then this is what they'll look like in the tile when you pop it open. And just want to zoom in a little bit. So here we have 3 questions, and this is a place where this is a relatively, this is an interesting, pretty new experiment that has just emerged out of some conversations that I've had with a client recently, and then it's actually spread to a second client. So in this context, we're also asking, not only asking how well you know people, we're asking people to flag the people that they'd like to connect with, and then say if they're committed to reaching out to that person, and then when they have, to come back and update. So we're no longer treating the possible connections. So, I mean, we've seen variations of this before, but usually it's just added into the first level question. So here we're actually asking them to indicate if they're willing to really follow up. So we've got two projects have started this. They've both just launched in the last couple of weeks. So it's too soon to know if this will make a difference. But I did already notice that in one case, a woman had indicated that she had an interest in knowing 5 people on the map. And when I looked a couple days later, she had actually reached out to one of them already and indicated that on the map. And that was even before this convening that the map was built for began. So it's these little things, like how do we think about these small things differently, that can make a really big difference somewhere. And then we really want to all learn those things from each other. Okay, so the rest of, go back to here. The rest of setting up is just defining email templates, which I'm sure you can figure out. Defining the opt-in form, if you need to use an opt-in form, defining settings, which is in here is where we put that instruction text on the front page. And then launching is really just about adding members to your project. You can add them a couple ways, either manually, just typing them in, or you can add them by uploading a CSV file. Once you've got them loaded, let me show you what that looks like. So this is a dummy data. I'm not showing you any real people's emails, but so you end up with a list that looks like this. And then you can invite people in a one-off way by sending them an invitation from this area, or you can go into manage invitations and send invitations based on their status. Once you have data coming in to into sumApp, you can come into data management. You can generate, set up your time tag frames, your time framing time tags here. You can get this link to your data set, plug that link into Kumu. start to build your map. And then once your map is made, there's another link that you plug back into in settings to get your map page. Okay, that was really a whole lot of talking, and I'm going to stop now.